Okay. To those of you in the sanctuary, welcome. We're going to go live in about 9 seconds. So I'm just going to give you the heads up. I'm so glad you're here. All right, good evening. Welcome to all of you, both those gathered in the sanctuary and those that are with us online. My name is Rebecca Chancellor Six, and I serve as the Associate Pastor for Adult Faith Formation here at First Presbyterian Church of Dallas. And I am delighted that we are here September 19th at 6 o'clock p.m. I want to share with you that our Faith Formation Committee gathered last April 2021 to do some brainstorming about what God was calling us to do with and for the church over the next year. And out of that April meeting came the idea of doing a Justice and Equity series. And one of the committee members specifically mentioned our speaker tonight, Darren Babcock, and Bonton Farms as a potential connection, partnership, something that we might want to consider for this series. So that is part of what led us to today. A couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to meet Darren in person and was so moved by the brief time that we had together that I knew we were going to be in for something special. And I know a number of our members have visited Bonton Farms, have been a part of what's going on out there. I even saw a social media post, I think yesterday, about Bonton Farms. So some of you know a little bit, and some of you may be learning for the first time. Darren Babcock is the founder and CEO of Bonton Farms. He has also been given the titles Disruptor, Social Justice Advocate, Sower of Seeds. Darren is a Christian, and he couldn't sit idly by as he encountered his brothers and sisters in South Dallas ravaged by institutional inequities. He left a successful corporate career and moved from his home in North Dallas to serve inner city residents of Bonton with his wife for the past 9 years. Tonight, we will have the privilege of hearing some of Darren's personal story and how God moved in his life to bring about transformation and change. And if you happened to worship with us this morning, I did not plan this, but we were talking in worship about the importance of bringing the most vulnerable people around us into the center and welcoming them in. And I think we're going to hear a lot from Darren about what it means to serve the most vulnerable among us. And then tonight is the first of 6 weeks. So then for the next 2 weeks, we will gather here, same time, same place, in the sanctuary or online. And Darren will continue to share some of the work that he's been a part of and the people that he's met. And we will be challenged. So just get ready for that. After the 3 weeks of presentations and discussion, we will then, the second half of our series is going to be meeting with the people in Bonton Farms. And I'm super excited about this. It's one thing to sit and listen. It's a whole nother thing if we take the time to build community and relationships and engage in conversation over breaking bread with our brothers and sisters. So that will be the goal for the second 3 weeks. So let's see if I get this right. That will be October 10th, 17th, and 24th. And I think later this week, we will open up on our website registration for those potluck suppers with additional information about that. You all are welcome to join us for one, some, or all of these gatherings. We are just grateful that you are interested and here with us tonight. I also want to mention that right now, this is being broadcast in several different places, but including our Facebook Live feed. And so if you do have a question that you would like to ask Darren, we may have some time for a few questions at the end. You can post those to our Facebook Live feed, And Megan Fendice will help collect those, and we will see if we have anything that we want to ask at the end. If you happen to have my cell phone number, you're also welcome to send me a text with your questions. All right. I think that is the introduction. Darren, we're so excited you're here. Please come up and share with us.
Good evening. It's good to be here with you all tonight. Rebecca, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and share. We're going to get to spend some time together, so tonight I'm just going to start off and tell a little bit about my journey, my personal journey, and how I got here, so that hopefully by the time it's all over that this will all make sense. But I grew up I'm a Texas guy. I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. My family migrated there. They were sharecroppers from Tennessee. And my great-grandfather, at 14, fell in love with my great-grandmother. She was the family that owned the land. That was forbidden at the time, so they eloped at 14 and came to Texas and wound up settling outside of Muleshoe, Texas. He got a job leveling oil fields with an oxen-drawn plow to level the field while they drilled for the oil, and they built oil field storage tanks, and they lived in a dugout when they came. So literally, they lived in a hole in the ground. And so I come from really humble beginnings, blue-collar beginnings. It's kind of the way in West Texas. For me, I think growing up, the lessons that I heard over and over and over again is all about character and work ethic, and that if you really wanted something, then you had to apply yourself to go out and get it. But if you applied yourself, you could have almost anything, right? It's all up to you. And so I listened to those lessons, and I applied them in my life, and they worked for me. I'm blessed intellectually and physically to be able to do just about anything I put my mind to. So when I would apply the lessons that my family taught me, that it worked for me. I wound up getting a scholarship to wrestle at the University of Oklahoma, and I know being in Dallas, that might be a difficult thing to talk about with the OU Texas game coming up anyway, but I got to go on a wrestling scholarship to the University of Oklahoma, and it was interesting. In 1984, the year I went, was the year of the Olympics in Los Angeles. We had two people coming back from the Olympics that had won gold medals. And I'm this freshman kid from Amarillo that thought that I was all that until I got there and saw them, and boy, was I intimidated by that. But the coach stood up and said, look, we have all these champions and this legacy of championships, and there's 41 of you here today, and of the 41 of you, there's going to only be a handful that make it to this level. There's going to be some of you that don't have what it takes at this level. There's going to be some of you that don't go to class and lose your scholarship. There's going to be some of you that find the girls more interesting than the dedication that you have to be a college athlete, student athlete. And people are going to fall everywhere in between, but you are in the right place to accomplish your dreams if you apply yourself. And they handed out these shirts, and on the front of them it said Oklahoma Wrestling, and on the back it said, if it is to be, it's up to me. Well, that's what I've been told my whole life. It made sense for me. So everything I ever really applied myself for, I got. I met a beautiful girl, happened to be from Borger, Texas, not too far from Amarillo, and convinced her that I was more mature and a better guy than I actually was at the time. And after we graduated from college, got married, and had two boys, and I thought I wanted to be a big business tycoon, so I went out and got some experience in the business world, and wound up starting my own company in Portland, Oregon, because I wanted to live on the Pacific coast. All of those things that I wanted, I pursued, I worked for it, and got. And about 2 years after moving to Oregon and starting our business, my wife started having this pain on the side of her tongue, and couldn't figure out what it was. We were both athletic and loved to eat, so they kept trying to put us on these diets that we wouldn't abide by. And it seemed like the pain would ebb and flow according to when she would be good on the diet and when she wouldn't. And then finally, when it got painful enough, she just started trying to follow that diet really strictly, and nothing helped. So we went back to the doctor, and they did a little biopsy on it, and we went off to Mexico on a surfing trip. And when we got back from Mexico, furthest thing from our mind is any kind of doctor's visits or anything else. But when we go, this was back when you had the answer machine, you had to actually push the button and listen to. So we go through the messages and are listening to them, and there's one from her doctor saying, when you get back, you need to come see me. So we go in for the doctor's visit. I'm 30 years old, she's 28. We have two boys that are, 3 and 4 years old, and he tells us that she has cancer. And it's like, for a 28 and 30-year-old, that doesn't really register the weight of that, or at least it didn't for us. And they tell us that she has cancer and that they're going to have to do some surgery, and then they'll know more from there when they do the surgery. So they wound up doing a surgery and have to do a neck dissection to see if she has cancer in her lymph nodes, and comes back that not only was the tumor on her tongue cancerous, but she had cancer that had spread to her lymph nodes. So she goes through this horrible stuff of head and neck cancer, of radiation and chemotherapy and surgeries. And 2 years to the day after she was diagnosed, she passed away. And it was this, I'm not even sure that I have the words to describe it to you. But if you can imagine my wife, the mother of my children, my business partner, the one that affirmed me and who I was as a man, and then everything that I believed in, this whole thing that I had been taught and raised with about anything that you wanted and you applied yourself for, you could get, all of that came crumbling down. It was just not true. I grew up in a church. I was a pretty ornery kid, and so my parents took me there about every time the doors were open. In fact, sometimes I think they would call and ask them to unlock the doors just to take us. But I never got it. I never really understood what that meant. And I can remember thinking deeply about it. I didn't take it lightly. I remember thinking about how our life was in our family, and like most families, things aren't always great, right? And then all of a sudden you go to church and everybody dresses up and acted like everything was okay, and it was like not okay. And so what is this about this thing that we're going and listening to? It just doesn't make sense to me. And then as an adult, I can look back and say, well, part of it too was, I was really not looking for a life that required me to surrender or to submit to something. As a young man, the truth be told, I wanted to do things my way. And so I come to this church and they're saying, no, there's a better way, there's a different way. And I don't really think I was mature enough to want to hear that. So I was looking for ways to kind of write this off as something that wasn't real. And that's what I found. Well, when I went off to college, never darkened the door of a church again, never thought about it again until we had children. And all of a sudden, it's like, I really want to know what I believe. Like, it's important. It's the most important question that any of us will ever answer for ourselves is, who is God? And if he's real, what does it require of us? And so I started trying to study just to learn that. And about the time that I started doing that seriously is about the time my wife was diagnosed with cancer. So when she passed away, for me, it was just this, this sense of just being lost, of having everything that I thought that I believed in and thought to be true and had leaned on my whole life was not dependable anymore. Where do you go from that? I was angry at the fact that I had to be a mom and dad now. Every time I'd wash their clothes or have to go to the grocery store for them, it's like I had this anger that I was having to do both of these things. I didn't want to do that. And I can remember the day that I got the news that this was kind of the end of the road is I had a doctor's visit in Portland, and so we hadn't heard back from her doctor, so I said, when I'm through with my visit, I'll go visit your doctor, and I'll come back and I'll share the good news with you, and then we're going to go celebrate with dinner, right? And so I go to my doctor and then go visit her doctor, and when I get there and sit down in the waiting room, they were like, well, the doctor wants to talk to you, why don't you go ahead and have a seat? So I sat and waited for the doctor to come out, and he took me back to this room, and I remember him sitting across the desk from me and looking at me, and he said, Darren, I'm so sorry, there's just nothing else we can do. It's like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know how you guys may have heard that before at some place in your life with somebody that you love, but to be 30 years old and hear it, man, it wasn't real to me. I couldn't make it real. I couldn't figure out what this meant, that as simple as those words are, there's just nothing left that we can do. It was so hard for me to digest and to grab a hold of and to try to make sense out of. And I can remember, I don't know if you've ever been to Portland or not, but Portland's downtown is on the waterfront of the Willamette River. It's a beautiful place, and to get out of downtown and head south, you have to parallel the Willamette River to get on I-5 to head south. And so I'm in the car, and across from the Oregon Health Science University and the Willamette River to the left, there's a lot of people that are homeless that use the waterfront park there. And so as I'm sitting at every one of these lights waiting to get on the highway, there's homeless that keep walking and crossing the street in front of me. And as bad as this is, all I can remember sitting there thinking is like, why my wife? You know, what? Why? I don't understand. What? You know, people that aren't even taking care of themselves. And then why does this have to happen? And I just kept remembering having to do that, all the while trying to put off the idea that when I get home, I have to figure out how to tell her this. It was a crazy, stressful time for a young person that had really always had the world in the palm of his hands. You know, everything that I ever wanted, I just had to work a little bit for it, and I got. And life was unfolded like that for me until this happened, and all of a sudden there were no answers. And, you know, I went back and shared the news with her, and, you know, we wrestled through what that meant between then and when she ultimately passed away. But now all of a sudden I'm in this place, and I don't, it's foreign to me. I'm a pretty optimistic person by nature. All of a sudden, the whole world is dark to me. Like, I don't want to get out of bed in the morning. Little things like going to the mailbox and getting the mail out was like arduous, exhausting work to me. And what I didn't understand what was happening is I was having a mental episode. My mental health was under attack. I was experiencing severe anxiety and depression that I didn't ever know. I didn't even know what it was. It's just scary. And so, again, go back to the way I was raised. A man doesn't admit any of that. So all I knew is everything that was going on in me is, one, it's scary, but two, I got to hide it from everybody. So in order to hide it from everybody, I just pulled away and locked myself in my house and just kind of isolated. It's a bad thing to do, but that's what I did. And it wasn't long until people started asking about, is he okay? Like, is he going to come out? Or should we go get him? Or should we take him out? So I had a group of friends that kept trying to come by and get me to go out, kept trying to come by and get me to go out, and kept trying to come by and get me to go out. And I just didn't want to go. But one night I just relented so they would try to leave me alone. And we went out, and all of this stuff had been built up inside of me. And I'm not even sure to this day what happened, but we went out to a sports bar, and it wasn't long before this altercation broke out. And I got in this huge fight for 3 or 4 minutes. All of that pain and that anger and that anxiety and that darkness, all of it for those 3 or 4 minutes just went away. I didn't feel that pain anymore for just that little bit of time. But I wanted so desperately for that relief. The only way I knew to experience that relief was to hurt other people. So I started going out and looking for trouble. And it was in that trouble and hurting other people, as crazy as that sounds, but that was the place where I felt release. One night this happened, and the police came, and I jumped in the car with some people I didn't know to get away from the police and wound up back at their apartment. And they were running drugs up and down the West Coast. And it was the first night that when I get back to their apartment, there's drugs all over their apartment. And I did a line of cocaine on their kitchen table that night. And it was another time where the minute that that drug entered my airways and affected my brain, I didn't feel that pain anymore. Well, now I could find a way that I could not feel my pain without having to hurt other people. So this is even better, right? So the next thing you know, I'm using drugs and alcohol to medicate myself through this foreign situation that I'm in. And before long, as it always goes, the drugs and alcohol that I was consuming to try to help me not feel that pain began using me to inflict pain on me. It never works out the way you think. And I'm already in big trouble. I'm alone. I've isolated and separated myself from everybody. And, some of my close friends just started coming by to check on me. And when they kind of saw the state that I was in, some of my friends that I wrestled with in college flew in, and unannounced, when I opened the door and they saw me, they knew something was really wrong. And they convinced me to go get help. I didn't want to go, so I went with them just to appease them. I knew they were headed on a flight back out. So as soon as they got on the flight, I jumped out the window and went back home. But they continued. They would not relent. They continued pursuing me. And eventually they had to get my more immediate family involved, but they wouldn't quit on me. And one time when they all came together and put enough pressure on, I agreed to go get help, but I still wasn't something I was wanting to do on my own. It was a place where I can remember just being absolutely lost with no answers. And I'm not the kind of person that I always have answers. I always have answers. Sometimes too often I have answers. My wife would tell you that sometimes I just need to listen and shut up and not have answers. But in this place, in this time, I didn't have any answers for life or for anything else. And so I was scared. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. And I'm in this place, and I don't know what's going to happen. And so I just wouldn't eat. So they put me on suicide watch because I wasn't taking care of myself, and they were worried about me. And part of that process was they sent some gentlemen by to visit me that had been there a while, and they were better. I mean, they weren't better, but they were better, right? And so as they were talking to me, all my mind could think of is, I'm trying to find a way out of this. I'm trying to find a way to get past this, to get to the other side, to become whole again. And I just don't think it's possible for me. But I could see something in those men. There was a spark in their eye. They were alive. They were doing better. And if they could do it, I could do it. So I started participating. And it was like the second day that I started participating that I had the counselor that was my main contact, and he said, today you're going to have to go see a spiritual counselor, and you'll go see her before lunch. She's a really sweet lady. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. And they're like, well, it's part of it. You need to go see her. You're going to go see her. And I was like, look, I don't want to. I'm really angry about things, and I don't want to offend her or hurt her in any way. So I just think it's better if I don't go. It wasn't until years after that, as I've shared my testimony before, that I recognized that I was angry, really angry at a God that I would have denied existed. Isn't that funny? How can you be so angry at something that you don't believe in? But even in my denial, there was still this smidgen of belief, or else I wouldn't have had anything to be angry at. But I went and talked to her, and she said something to me that I can just remember day after day. I could not stop thinking about what she said. And I remember that evening going back to my room and trying to rationalize and think through everything that I'd been through. And is there a way for me to overcome this? Is there a way for me to put the pieces back together again? And the second night this happened, I just remember having this overwhelming feeling of lostness, that I can't do it. I've screwed things up too much. I don't know how to go back and start this thing over with. I'm at a loss. Even though that I'm in this place, even though they're trying to help, even though I have family and friends that wouldn't quit on me, I had all of this going for me, I couldn't find my way out of it. And so I just fell to my knees and I cried out this faithless prayer. And I just said, God, I don't even know if you're real or not, but if you are, I quit. And I'm not a theologian, but I grew up in a church where we were taught to say this prayer if you wanted to surrender your life to Christ. And I can tell you that it's not the prayer that I prayed. But something happened to me because I meant it. Something happened to me that instant that I cried out and said, God, if you're real, I quit. I have never experienced such pure freedom and joy than in that moment on the floor of a rehab facility outside of Portland, Oregon. I don't even know, I have no words to try to describe it to you other than to say that of all of the amazing things that have happened where it felt like everything was going your way, and whatever joy you experience when maybe it's grandchildren being born or your children I don't know, whatever that time is where it feels like the weight of the world is gone and it's just everything is right and as it should be, this was multiple times more than that. And I don't know what happened, and I don't know how to explain it, but I just know that what happened at that minute was that there's this God that is real, and he loves us so much, and he meets us in these places that you wouldn't think you would find God, on the floor of a rehab facility. And he takes a guy like me that doesn't even know how to talk to him or how to acknowledge him, and he welcomed me and held me right then in that period. And if you don't know that, man, I wish that you would. But that was the start for me. But I don't know what this means. You know, I grew up in a Christian church, and to me, I was confused by it. So I've had this encounter, but what does it mean to quit to a God you didn't know? I don't know what that means. So when I got out of rehab, I started going to this church, and I went to a church that I guess you would call it a New Age church. It's like where everything they taught from everything. In fact, it's not even, you didn't even have to be a wise sage or a prophet. You just had to have some wisdom to share. People just get up and share what they think. And one day I was at this church and they taught out of the book of Matthew. And so after the service was over, I got in my car and drove home, and I opened up my Bible. I don't think I had opened it since I'd left to go to college years before. And I read in the book of Matthew. And while I grew up in a church and I had heard all of that stuff, I had never heard it. I mean, I'd listened, but I had never heard it. And what I read was absolutely the opposite of everything that I started talking to you about in the beginning, about this God that wants us to live a certain way and follow these certain rules, and it's kind of this fatherly thing with this accountability and discipline, and all that is true. But it's more, you're missing the point if you look at it the way I did. The point of it is this God loves us so much that he has a way, and his way is right, and it's beautiful, and it's life-giving, and our ways lead to death and destruction, and he came to rescue us from that. And then the beautiful part about it is what happens when you have this encounter with God is that he doesn't just save us and then we sit here on this earth and wait to finish our days out and die only to go to heaven. He says in his word that he's making all things new. And he tells us in the Lord's Prayer to pray that his kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And so we have this responsibility as believers, as Christ followers. We have this gift, this obligation, and this opportunity to be a part of the redemption of the entire world. We're not just here to live and to try to follow some rules and to die and go to heaven. There's part of it. But the beautiful part of it is he's making all things new. His kingdom is coming. And he's got a plan. There's no plan B, but his plan is to use his church, us, to be the hands and feet to the world. And when I read that for the first time, I thought, that's the most amazing, life-giving, freeing, beautiful thing that I've ever heard in my life. I can't wait to try to live that out. It's so much harder. It's so much harder to try to live that out than it is to not know that it exists in the first place. What does that mean? Where is the battle? How do you fight? Who do you fight against? Who are you helping? What side are you on? Where do you go? Where am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to pay my bills? I mean, all of these questions, right, started flooding. And all I can tell you is over the next couple of times that we're together, I'm going to be able to share with you how God orchestrated from that time of showing me who he is and teaching me what it means to surrender, to die and be born again, and then what it means to follow him. And so, I can just tell you that it's a beautiful journey that we're all on together. I don't know that, I certainly, as I mature in my faith and in my walk, I think there's more that I realize that I don't know than when I was just starting out. The more you know, the more you realize that you need to learn to do it. But 11 years ago, I was having coffee with a friend of mine, and he just said, I've got a friend that does prison ministry, and their impact on that prison system has been so profound. Against his better judgment, the warden started letting them have one-on-one meetings with some of the inmates. And in one of these meetings, my friend was told that this guy was up for parole. And my friend said, well, congratulations, that's amazing. And the guy said, I don't think I'm going to go to my hearing. And my friend couldn't understand, why would you not go to your parole hearing? And he just said, well, this is all I have. And my friend immediately thinks he's talking about prison and starts jumping in to say, no. Trust me, you've been locked up a long time, but the world still has something for you. You have an opportunity outside to build a life for yourself. Like, you need to go to your hearing. And he's like, I'm not talking about prison. I'm talking about this relationship. I have no family. I have nobody to go home to. This is all I have. And that comment, that 10 minutes with that gentleman that day changed my friend's life in a really profound way. That he died 4 or 5 years ago, my friend, but I don't know there was another day that passed that he didn't try to tell people when he had an opportunity how important relationships are. Authentic relationships where you really care about somebody and you sacrifice, both of you, to be in relationship with one another. And maybe because of COVID and the social distancing and how we've been kept apart for a period of time, maybe now's the right time to try to put that in context and to understand it deeper, because there's been a situation where we've been removed or separated from relationships that mean an awful lot to us. But I can just tell you that in Bonton, this gentleman winds up getting paroled, and he happens to be from a community in South Dallas called Bonton. And so my friend kept his word, and when he got paroled, went to Bonton to start meeting with him. And what happened is what I'm going to get to share with you over the next couple of times that we're together. But I'll just tell you this much, that when he started coming down, the gentleman that had been incarcerated started telling other people in the community, the strangest thing, this white guy comes down and he believes in me. Now, Bonton's a predominantly African-American community. It was established after Emancipation Proclamation. It's not historically classified as a freedmen's community, but it is a freedmen's community built under those circumstances. And so this class of races, this class of different cultures, this class of different experiences all of a sudden comes together. And the very first, most recognizable thing is nobody's ever told me they believed in me before. Has anybody else ever not been told before that they believed in? Nobody's ever believed in you? Well, this was so common in our community that other people started showing up because they wanted to be encouraged. They wanted to be present. They wanted to be around somebody that told them that they could do something, and that if you apply yourself to it, I'll be there with you. That our world is longing for that. Some of us in the church might call that discipleship, right? That's what discipleship looks like, to walk with somebody through life. in the ways that God describes for us to walk. But that's what happened 11 years ago, and how I got invited to the Bonton community was just to go down there to be an encouragement to some guys that had been incarcerated for many, many years. And God's just taken that small step of willingness and obedience and done some really extraordinary things that I'm excited to share with you in the future. But I wanted to take some time tonight just to tell you the backstory of how I got there, so that hopefully the rest of it starts to make a bit of sense. So thank you so much for. We do okay with time?
Yeah, we have plenty of time.
Okay, I didn't know, so I can. How much more time do we have? 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Okay. So can I go a little bit further into the story? So I wasn't sure where we were there, but I'll go a little bit further into the story from those Saturdays. The first Saturday I went down, there's a guy named David Ritchie that opened the door, and he had on a GPS monitor. He'd just been released from federal prison, had a GPS monitor on, and he greeted me with this huge smile. And it's one of the things that I never forget is I walked into this house in this community that was so foreign to me, and I'll never forget how uncomfortable and awkward I felt, but how the community made me feel, how they embraced us and welcomed us with the warmest of smiles. It's a really strange place to be. Again, we're going to talk about reconciliation a lot, and part of this reconciliation is our country has a history. And when you go to a community that was a freedmen's community, as a white person, there's this tension there, because in a lot of cases, we look like a lot of the things that caused their suffering. And yet, this community was so amazing in the grace that they showed, the warmth that they showed from that very first day. And I can remember walking in and sitting down with them, and we shared a little bit of breakfast and started to learn together the power that food has to bring us together as people. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to get to share this potluck experience with your church and with our community. I think it's going to be incredibly rewarding for all of us. But we started to learn the power that food has to bring us together, and how it starts to melt away some of those concerns and differences and biases and prejudices, whatever all that bucket of stuff is that we may be carrying with us. Over a meal, that starts to soften and erode and wash away. And I remember the conversation, when we started into the conversation, being, nobody's given us a chance to work. That was the thing that was said. Nobody's given us a chance to work. And again, I didn't have a background for that. I didn't really understand what they were talking about, but nobody's given us a chance to work. One of the guys walked in and said, hey, I got a job interview this week. And everybody's like, no, you didn't. And he's like, yeah, I did. I got a job interview, and they called and invited me back. And so right outside of our community, there's a Pilgrim's Pride chicken processing plant. And he'd gone and walked in with his brother to apply for a job at Pilgrim's Pride. And they called him back. And so he's sharing this good news with our group. And it's so uncommon that nobody believes him that he got a call back. And he's like, no, I did get a call back. And I'm going to go cash my check from the TDC, the Texas Department of Corrections, and I'm going to get a suit. And I want to go back on this interview with a suit. Well, you go help me pick it out. So we all go to this secondhand place and buy a suit. I've still got a picture of it. It's priceless, but he went on his job interview with a suit that still had the tag on the sleeve. But he's probably the only one that's ever gone to a chicken processing interview in a suit. So I thought, he's got that going for him. What happened there was indicative of the challenge that we still face. It was really harsh. It's harsh for me to even tell today. A lot of times when I share it, I get emotional because I saw the impact that it had on him. But when he walked in and sat down in the lobby in the suit, one of the guys came walking through the lobby, and he saw him, and he's like, why are you back here? Oh, I hope you didn't think we called you back for an interview. And he said, yes, that's exactly why I thought you called me back, hence the suit, right? And the guy said, oh, no, we didn't call you back for an interview. One of the guys that works here saw you, and you look like a guy that robbed us. He wanted you to come back to see if you were him. I don't think in my lifetime anybody's ever talked to me like that. I don't know that outside of this experience that I've seen the effect that words can have detrimentally on a person, but to walk through that time with him where he had gotten his hopes up so much and everybody had said, no, you didn't get an interview. And he said, yes, I really did. And then he has this one $200 check from 7 years in prison, and he spends it on a suit for that interview, and then to feel like such a fool. You get to see what happens to a person when we're reckless and when we're thoughtless and when we somehow lose sight that we're all children of God made in his image, and the words come out and have an effect. And it in many cases, when we're not there, that instance turns into a lot of violence, because there's nothing that happens when somebody has a severe degree of disenfranchisement, and they feel like their back's against the wall. They do dangerous things. I always tell people, the difference between you and somebody from my community in a bad situation, let's just say we all have this weakness of being too quick to anger when somebody pulls in front of us on a road, right? Maybe that's my problem, but let's assume that we share that. And if you have nothing to lose and you get angry and you're on a fit of road rage and you have nothing to lose, your choices in that situation may be radically different than it is if you have something to lose. If you have a family to go home to, if you have a house to pull your car into, if you have a car that you're driving that you own, if you have things in this world that you're attached to, people that are expecting you, kids that you're going to teach, whatever all these different things are, if you have something to lose, it affects our decision-making process when we're in these really stressful situations. I would argue that there's not a lot of difference between us as human beings of what we're willing to do in the right or wrong circumstances. Can we all agree to that? We're all capable of extraordinary things. I love C.S. Lewis says that if there's a sin that you think you can't commit, you've already committed the sin of pride. Like, we all have this in us, but what I've seen is that there's nothing more dangerous than a person without hope, person that has nothing to lose. And so in this situation, my friend felt like he had nothing to lose and was going to go out and make the world feel his pain. And instead, something different happened. For the first time in his life, we had a conversation about it. Instead of just acting off of impulse and emotion, we had a conversation about it. And we talked about what it means. The words that come up often in our community are, especially when you're talking to men, is this heightened sense of needing to be respected. And so a lot of times you'll hear people use the words, "You can't talk to me like that, I'm a grown man." Well, one of the first things that happened with our work in Bonton is, if we're going to do this together, we have to be able to be honest with each other. So that means I may need to tell you something you don't want to hear. Are you okay with that? You know, and it was always yes until we had to tell them something that they didn't want to hear. And it's like, then you can't talk to me like that. I'm a grown man, right? So it immediately begs the question, what is a grown man? Like, maybe we don't even know what that means, right? So what does it mean to be a grown man? Because if we're talking about a grown man is somebody that if somebody speaks to you that way, you go find out where they live and do something bad to their family or to them. If that's what it means to be a grown man, then I think my definition is different than yours. So how do we agree on what the definition of a grown man means? Well, the only thing I know is there is a God, and he wrote a book, and he's the authoritative, and his word is truth, and it tells us what it is. So what does God's word say about being a grown man? And we started going to God's word about what it means to be a grown man in that instance. And I will tell you that the puzzle pieces I described earlier, you know, of all this stuff that's happened in my life up to this point, that time where I went to church and they spoke out of the book of Matthew, and I went home and read it, and for the first time I heard this God that loves us, that invites us into this story, that he's made all the chaos and division and everything that you'll hear when you go home and turn on the news tonight, if you do, before you go to bed. He is in control, and he is in the business of making all things new, and he has a strategy, and he placed a church, and in that church are people And the people that call him Savior, the people that call the church home, are the people that are going to be the hands and feet to restore the world. What an amazing story. And then all of a sudden, because I have a friend that's getting ready to go do something that he will regret, take a life or try to take a life out of this anger, instead it leads to this conversation about who God is and who he says we are. And to see you'll get to meet him through this time that we're going to have together. And I can't wait for him to share his story with you through his lens. But that was the beginning story of how this all began to unfold, and how God's presence opened up the conversation for who we are as people and how we relate with one another, and how in a world where people have been wounded and called names and told they thought they looked like robbers and trafficked and abused and molested, and I can go on and on and on with the tragedies that the people we serve have experienced. And yet, in the middle of all that, he says, I am God, I love you, and I have a plan for you. And then we get invited to walk along that journey with him. And so when we get together next time, we'll get to pick up and talk about how that seed of that one tragic situation and being able to be present with him in that time where he was trying to decide what to do, how do I respond to this, how that opened the door for everything else that you see happening through the ministry of Bonton Farms from that point forward. So thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have a couple of questions that have come through. So you talked about when you first went to Bonton, your kind of initial role was as an encourager.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, can you share a bit more about the intersection of your past with your initial work at Bonton as an encourager?
Well, I think that being so different, the past was really helpful for me that we could relate, that I had been to a place where I had lost hope and that I didn't belong and that the world had nothing for me and that I had to start fresh again. In spite of having all this opportunity, privilege, whatever words we want to assign to that, I had still lost everything. And so because I had been on equal footing at some point in my life, it gave credibility that we could relate to one another, even amidst all these differences.
Thank you. Can you speak just a bit, and you may be getting into more of this in the next couple weeks, but to the role of God in the work that Bonton Farms is doing? And the question, is it an openly Christian organization?
You would think that's an easy question to answer, but it's not. We are very much a Christian organization, but because of what we believe that we are to seek those that are lost and marginalized and those that wouldn't likely walk into this building because of what it represents. And so you won't go to our website and see scriptures. You won't see things that would create a barrier from people that have been wounded by the church or people that don't get it or people that had been there and just didn't understand it the way I did. Doesn't matter where you come from. There's a long history, and we want to welcome people in and show them the goodness of God without creating barriers that would never let them hear it in the first place. So everything that we are is driven by what God's word says about us and what our role is in this world through his scripture, the Bible. And so that is our foundation. But the way that starts to manifest looks a lot different than other ministries across Dallas. And we struggle with a lot of churches because of that, because they want us to be really overtly about our faith. But if I have 10 people coming next month from prison that were all Muslims, how do they step onto that farm if they're not allowed to because their faith won't allow them even to come on our property? I can tell you one of the most beautiful things I've had the privilege of doing is leading a Muslim imam to Christ. But that wouldn't have happened if I didn't allow God to work in his heart at his pace, and if I felt some ownership that I had to impress my faith and religion on him, instead of us saying, man, I've tried everything in this world and it failed me and this is what happened in my life. And it's this honest sharing of experiences without threat, think so often Christians, we feel like we need to defend Christ. And I think he's fine.
Yeah.
I think he just needs us to honor him.
Right.
And to be faithful and obedient in how we show up every day.
And building those authentic relationships.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. In your bio, it mentions that you couldn't sit idly by as you encounter brothers and sisters in South Dallas ravaged by institutional inequities. I know we will hear more about this, but can you give us a little peek into what are some of those institutional inequities?
I mean, they run the gamut from what I just shared about my friend Darius and the way that the world will interact with them that you might not see on a daily basis. But the big things, in my view, is that if you look at the span of the history of this country, we started off with these really amazing principles. In the second paragraph, the first sentence of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and have certain inalienable rights," right? Endowed by their Creator. And but we had slavery going at the same time.
Right.
And so the way that unfolded in Dallas is after slavery, communities like Bonton formed. And then because of segregation, those communities had to build their own businesses because they couldn't go eat at a white restaurant. They couldn't go to a white hospital. Well, as the businesses started being successful, some of the black families that were experiencing success tried to buy homes. And in Dallas, that's what led to the bombings. And so there were bombings that happened, and they started referring to our part of town as Bomb Town. And the mayor at the time was a mayor named Wallace Savage. And if you read the Old Times Herald article, they use fear a lot the way they do today, that say if we don't apply for this new federal public money from the federal government to build housing to keep black people where they belong, then they're going to bring disease and violence into our neighborhoods. And so what birthed across the country was this public housing being put in our inner cities with the purpose being to separate black people from the rest of us. But the bigger sin was not separating black people from the rest of us. It was separating them from the things that we use to build lives with, the goods, services, resources, and opportunities. To this day in Dallas, if you draw a line across I-30, which is right out the church doors, 95% of the jobs in our city are north of I-30. 45% of the people live south of I-30. Only 5% of the jobs are there. And so you may think, well, shoot, we have cars. It's in modern times. You're not on horseback anymore, but poverty greatly restricts mobility. And so where you have poor people, they struggle with getting around. Mm-hmm. In a city that's as big as Dallas is, we have created pockets where people from that point to this day don't have equitable housing, education, health care, economic opportunities, non-predatory banking systems. All of those structures, the main foundations of things that we as people use to build lives with, are still not present in our inner cities. And then we wonder why the outcomes are the way they are. Right. 3 years ago, I got to give a TED Talk, and I'll probably share that story. But the profound thing about that time to me was the guy that spoke before me was a smart cities guy, talking about a lot of predictive analytics and how they make our cities run more efficiently. But he spent a good portion of his time talking about automated vehicles, the fact that we have cars on our highways driving themselves, making over 1 billion calculations a second at 70 miles an hour to be safer on the roads without a person behind them than a car with us. The lady that spoke after me was a geneticist from the Mayo Clinic talking about organ transplants and the whole thing from checking the thing on your license to trying to care flight the organ to you in time while the integrity of it's intact, to the surgery, to the rejection medicine that follows. All that's a thing of the past because they can take a stem cell from your own DNA and make a brand new heart, liver, kidney, and lung. And I'm up there talking about a community in the richest country in the history of the world, in one of the richest cities in the richest country in the history of the world, that doesn't have access to food. So we planted a garden. Oh, and then we were written a ticket because it was illegal to have a garden in the city that you sold vegetables from. And these are the kind of things that we still face today. And if we can make brand new hearts, livers, kidneys, and lungs, and if we can have cars drive themselves, I assure you that these problems that we're experiencing in our community have no reason to exist other than we have not done our part. That's why I'm so excited to be able to share with you, because we are the ones that can do this. It's not our city. It's not our government. Our God created things to happen in a way, and that way is for his church, for our people to be the ones that solve these problems for our city. And so when we look introspectively at what role we played in our city, I think we have to look and challenge ourselves that these things still exist because we haven't done our part. But it's possible, and we can do it. And it's happening all around us.
It is, and we are so grateful for the work that you're doing. For the past year and a half or so, we have been talking about the history of racism in Dallas, the current racism in Dallas, and our call to work toward racial equity and healing justice. And so that's been a big part of our current culture. Last question. So I think out of what you've just been talking about and thinking about the racial equity conversation that some of us are now having, can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be a white man in a position of leadership in the Bonton community?
Man, they're not throwing me. Maybe next time we'll have easier questions. There's amazing beauty that my community invites me in and has extended grace and mercy to me and trusted me enough to allow this beautiful thing to be born that's changing our city. And at the same time, there are a lot of people that are wounded that can't extend that grace and mercy because the wounds they and their family have endured, and that I get death threats and all kinds of other things that come on the opposite end of that spectrum. And so the answer is that if we're going to enter this space, we have to understand we're stepping into a space where there's been a lot of carnage and pain and suffering happen and trauma, and that stuff, you can't sweep it under a rug. And we have to be strong enough to be present in that pain and to be strong enough to know that God is taking what the enemy intended for evil, and he will use it for good if we can trust him in that space. But we can't be hurt when people react because of pain that's been inflicted for so long, and to allow him into that space. But it's messy. It's some people would call it dangerous, but I think there's no safer place to be. Out of all of the crazy threats and things that we've experienced, we've had our car stolen 3 times. I can go down the list of stuff that's happened, and never once have I felt in danger I just don't think there is a safer place to be than doing what God assigns you to do, even though it may look to those standing back from a distance saying, what in the world are you thinking? Because that's what my mom and dad say all the time. When I call and say our car got stolen again, she'll say, what are you doing? But yeah, it's worth every bit of it.
Thank you. May I offer a prayer for us to close? God, you are transformative, and you are transforming even in this very moment. We give you great thanks for Darren and for his testimony and for the work that he has been doing in our community to work toward racial equity and healing justice. Oh God, we thank you for the walls that you are helping to break down and the bridges that you are helping to build. And we do pray that you would equip us to step into places that are not always comfortable, to work toward building new and authentic relationships so that true healing and reconciliation might come to our community. Oh God, we pray that you will continue to work in and through Darren and in and through each of us. And over the coming weeks, may we truly have open hearts and minds to hear what it is you are saying to us. And may we respond to be the hands and feet of Christ in this place and in this time. We ask that you be with the people of the Bonton community and neighborhood. May your light and your love reign above all else. And until we meet again, O God, hold us in your palm and grant us the gifts of grace, peace, and love. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.